topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, listeners. This is Divya, and excited to be here with you. So today we have a treat in store for you. Before we go to that, I want to share thank you from the bottom of my heart for getting our books. For those of you who have got a copy, I would request you if you can leave us a review, whatever your heart feels. That would be awesome. And if you have not got your copy, it would be great if you can get a copy of either of our two books, Entrepreneur's Garden or Expert to Influencer, because they will help you, regardless where you are in life, to live the life you deserve and live the lifestyle you want. So also remember to spend that 1 hour of your time every month in helping others so that we can keep the kindness going. So let's get started. I'm sure you have heard of tater tots, and you've probably had tater tots in your lifetime. And of course, they taste really good. So we are going to learn the story about that today. Welcome. So we have
Grigg.
Leslie and Steve Grigg with us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are y'all doing?
We're doing great. I'm doing great.
I just shoveled 8 inches of snow.
Well, so Steve, where are you at?
I'm in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, I did hear you had a really, you guys got pounded with snow.
We did.
So share with us, if how you are related and when you grew up, what did the tater tots play a role in your childhood?
I was born in Ontario, Oregon, which is the home of the Ore-Ida tater tot plant, Ore-Ida Foods. My father and his brother, so my uncle, co-founded Ore-Ida Foods back in 52. And I remember growing up, by the time I was about 10, I was kind of realizing that Tater, that Ore-Ida was a very big deal. It was a small community and employed lots of local people. I remember one time going to the office where my father worked and visiting there, and he said he wanted to go make his rounds. So he stood up, opened his desk drawer, and pulled out a salt shaker, slipped it in his suit pocket, and off we went to inspect the French fry line at the time. And I remember, and I've never forgotten it, which is part of my addiction to, French fries and tater tots. We would go to the conveyor belts where the French fries were just coming off the cooking line, and he would grab a great big hand of just piping hot French fries, and he got that salt shaker out, put it on there on those fries, and we ate those right off the line. And I couldn't believe how good they tasted. So it was it was very meaningful to me that he knew the names of most of the people we passed in the hallways and on the conveyor belt lines. You know, hello Bob, hello Bert, and I felt inspired that he was doing good in the community.
Hmm. Leslie, do you have any fond memories like Steve?
I do. Steve and I are second cousins. My grandfather Wells was Golden and Nephi's eldest brother. Oh,
Sorry, Les, you're breaking up.
is this better?
No, sorry.
I'm not sure why it says it's not muted.
Well, while Les is figuring that out, I will just add that my uncle Golden and my father was Nephi. They started out. They were inseparable as kids. They used to do everything together. They came from a family of 13 people, and were post-Depression and post-World War II, and were very, very, very close. And they they pretty much had nothing, so their future was wide open. And they didn't start out to make tater tots. They started out just trying to sell produce off their little farm to feed their families.
Mm. So, Steve, tell us how you related to Leslie.
Leslie is my first cousin once removed.
So
So
you said that your father and your father and uncle started
correct.
Tater
Correct.
Tots.
So
Like, is he your uncle's son? Because I'm sure our audience will be curious to know about that.
I'm sorry, say again.
So, is he your uncle's son?
He is
Hello?
one of my uncle's sons.
Is my video working?
Your video is fine. Your voice is still breaking up. So Les's father is the son of my uncle.
Oh, fantastic. Wow. So, tell me, you mentioned something very, very powerful, that your dad knew everybody and that it was a small community. It was just not employer employee employer employee relationship.
No,
So
in
what was
fact,
it like? You said that was so powerful and that was so beautiful that you still remember about it.
well, I've read, since then, of course, I've read all the stories. It was the community that rallied around my father and my uncle back when they were trying to acquire kind of a defunct a food processing plant. It was the community that rallied around them and helped support them and finance them um, to get that plant. It was farmers would mortgage crops. They mortgaged everything they had, of course, and getting money was difficult. The local banks were not interested in loaning them money because they didn't think there was much to it, because it was a failed food processing plant anyway, and
Mm,
they didn't want to. The local banks didn't want to invest at all in trying to revive that. But there was something about the influence of my father and his brother in the community that made them rally around, and so naturally they were all most of them were employed, and it was a very, very close community.
definitely. So tell us, how did that Tater, you said, or Ida Tater Tots, were they first off the line? Did they come up with the idea of Tater Tots? Tell us the whole story behind it.
Well, the they started making, or Ida started making French fries, and that was their concept was to cook them and then freeze them and ship them. And so French fries were first. Of course, potatoes are round and French fries are square, and so they had little shavings left over after they would cut up the potatoes into French fries. And those shavings were being sold off as a supplement to feed the local cattle. And they decided, oh, hello. And they decided that they hoped that there was maybe something else they could do with those shavings, because they weren't making any money off selling it as cattle feed. Now, remember, my father and my uncle are post-Depression.
Yeah.
Well, they said, my uncle said, the Depression came and went, and they didn't even know it, because they were so very, very poor. So these shavings, they just said, that's good potato. What could we do with that? And so the concept was to take those shavings, mix them with some flour, some seasonings and stuff, and make a kind of glop, if you will. And Wes is holding up what is lovingly referred to as the holy board, HOLEY. And my father would take that glop and shove it through one side of that board. These are prototypes, of course. Shove it through that board, and then my uncle would cut those off, and they would look at them and fry them up and try them out, and that's how they prototyped the first tater tots. And so that nobody knows about this board, but it is an early prototype of what they call formed food, and that was they had kind of put their, I guess it was kind of a post-war, in the 50s or in the early 50s, post-World War II. There was kind of this euphoric attitude, I think, in the country, and everybody had been kind of stunned with the World War, and I think they figured that they had a shot at just about anything, and they didn't limit their thinking, and I don't think they started out to be a well-known, an American food icon. I think they were just doing what came naturally.
Got it. So you mentioned about that they were post-Depression. So what would you say were the characteristics, or what were the characters, some of the qualities in their character that developed because of that?
They worked and worked. They started out on a little tiny farm of about 5 acres in another little community near Ontario. And they started out growing corn on their little farm. And what was interesting is that they would pick that corn in the evening. There's something about the temperature and climate of that area along the Oregon-Idaho, get it, Oregon-Idaho border, and that made it, the evenings were very cool, and they would pick that corn at night when it was cool, and they would pack it in ice water and let it sit overnight. Then they would take that corn out and take it around in a little horse and buggy and sell it to the neighbors who were farmers. So it's, you talk about selling, ice to the Eskimos. They were selling corn to farmers, and I don't think they thought anything of it. They just thought, well, we have corn and people eat corn, let's sell them corn. And I just think they had a sort of dogged determination to just go forward, because they had no other choice.
They had no other choice. So let's take some of the lessons from there and today's entrepreneurs. And I gotta say that we have been spoiled. I have stories of my grandparents as to what they may have faced, or my great grandparents, now in comparison to where we are at, where we have not only all the information at our fingertips and so much more convenience. So what can entrepreneurs of today learn from that story?
Les, is your audio working?
Testing. Is it working?
Not great. I don't know what the problem is. I'll keep talking.
Okay.
Well, Les has a lot to contribute. I'm sorry his audio isn't working. Entrepreneurs, I don't know if the word existed back then. We refer to it now as entrepreneurs. But again, they were just trying to feed their family. They were able to whatever they had, they were making the most of what they had. And the vision was to bring income into the family. They never looked. I don't think they looked very much further ahead than the next week or two, so that they could feed their families, and because they lived in the sagebrush. My parents lived in a dugout when they first got married in the side of the hill in eastern Oregon. And so they came from very humble circumstances. But I don't know what it was that motivated them to just keep going. I think the Depression hurt people who had something more than it hurt people who had very little. And so they sort of survived that, but I think the economy around them was suffering. But entrepreneurs today have, great success stories. They have a wealth of information, and I think companies come and go quite quickly in the internet era. They started in '52. They had several companies, Grigg Brothers Produce, Grigg Brothers Farms, and things like that. And one thing led to another as they just sort of did what came natural. If they needed more corn, they would contract with neighboring farms that they could gather the corn from their fields. They started with 5 acres. Before too long, and not too many years, it was 200 acres. And they were still contracting with other farmers to get portions of their fields to harvest the corn, again, pack it in ice water, cool it off, and sell it. In fact, when they first, we'll go back to that, the produce company, the Bridgeford company, that factory laid idle for a while, and it came up for auction. This is where the community really came to the aid of not only my parents. I don't think they were looking to just elevate themselves above anything else. They were mostly trying to help the community. What was good for the community was good for everybody. And so
from
they
what
would.
it sounds like, Steve,
Yes.
you shared very powerful lessons. One is rallying the community. Continue, because what happens is, especially in the world of online, we have become so disconnected.
Mm.
We are connected, and yet we are disconnected, because if you think about it, we have got connections different, and people are still rallying. So one of the key things is, one of the lessons that I am learning over here is that even as you're growing online, it's important to build a community. It's important to build that relationship, form that meaningful connections with people. So then that way, when something happens, you can come together and rally around each other. And that's actually one of the things that my book talks about, like expert to influencer. For me, an influencer is someone that is a rising tide that lifts all boats. And that's what it sounds like what happened with your dad and uncle. Another thing is that create opportunities. And as we have talked recently, that there are multiple opportunities over here. So think outside the box. And yes, that's cliche, but it's important to seek out opportunities and then have the dogged determination and perseverance to keep on going, not let things stop you. So let's go back to the plant. Now they have the plant, and now Leslie showed the board how they were making tater tots. What happened next?
Well, they naturally grew in size and in production. The Bridgeford plant, that they were only able to finance that with contributions from the community, local farmers. There were a lot of farmers, a lot of potatoes and beets and onions grown there, and all those farmers came to the aid of the community, and not only grew their own food and sold their own produce, but they helped to grow that plant. So as they, eventually they acquired the Bridgeford plant, and they would increase their production of corn. They had big, they called them ice towers. They would pipe water up to these big towers, make freeze it, break it into ice, and it would come down the chutes. I've got memories from other cousins. The ice would come down these chutes, and they would pack this corn into those wooden crates, cold corn, and pack it into those crates so that they would survive. And they would ship them. And they started shipping all over. First, they started on the West Coast, and then they would ship them eventually to the East Coast. And that was not really done. They didn't really. The world didn't really ship produce across the nation like that, especially from a tiny town like Ontario. And so that's how they grew in size. And the demand, corn didn't grow all year long, and they needed something to do when the corn harvest was over. What else could we do? And that's where potatoes came in. And so so they had this balance of corn and potatoes that they would so they could have a sort of a year-round cycle of produce. And I think that was just because they were farmers. That was common sense. They knew when the potatoes were on, they knew when the corn was on, and they knew that shipping corn in ice-filled crates was the way to go.
Right. So now we talked, that's such a fantastic story because it tells us that they were pioneers at that time. Shipping was not prevalent or common throughout the country, and they started doing it and started expanding the reach. So as they were expanding the reach, so after they started adding the seasonings and building the tater tots, how did it become a household name?
Les, are you on?
Testing. Is this working yet?
Boy, I don't know what happened. Les, everything was fine before the
It
broadcast.
worked fine yesterday, so don't know.
I apologize. In 1956, so tater tots were invented in 1953. I was invented in 1954. Anyway, in 1956, the National Potato Growers Convention was held in Miami, Florida. Great big brand new hotel, the Fontainebleau. And of course, my father wanted to get in front of all of these potato growers, national potato growers. So they packed up about 15 pounds of tater tots. They were in production, but they just weren't widely known. So he packed about 15 pounds worth of tater tots into a suitcase filled with dry ice and flew to this convention. And one way or another, he kind of, my dad, you got to understand, was a very, very charismatic. And he was able to influence the chef of a hotel to fry up these tater tots. And at one of the morning, I think it was the breakfast break, he organized with the chef to put little trays of little plates filled with tater tots on each of those tables as the attendees came to lunch or came to breakfast. And the quote is that they gobbled them up faster than a dead cat could wag its tail. my father was prone to witticisms, but that's how he got tater tots introduced, across the country and into a very influential audience.
That's fascinating. And how did the audience respond to it?
Well, they thought it was great. There's some gaps in the story about what was the logical step, but I will tell you that once they got tater tots in production, being from a very conservative, very frugal upbringing, as they started selling tater tots commercially, they were underpriced. People didn't value them. They didn't sell well, and so they increased their prices, and they sold better. So there was value added to something that they thought that the nation would appreciate, something inexpensive, where in fact the nation wanted something with value. So that tells you something about consumerism, I think.
That definitely tells that don't shy away from offering the price that market wants. And it's also important to do market research before you're launching a product, and also doing, this was back then and this is now, is doing a proof of concept. And that's where business plan kind of comes in, as well as just even testing a small group of people
Sure,
and seeing
sure.
how they're responding, and then adjusting and course correcting before we launch. And so this is a great lesson to be shared about it. So as they grew, and this was in what, like 60s, 70s?
So after 56, yeah, I mean they continued with all kinds of production. The Tater Tot was just one. They had a test kitchen, if you will. They had a
Mhm.
kitchen, and they were always experimenting with products. As a kid, they would bring home all this weird stuff. Potato flakes, onion rings, this kind of flavoring, this kind of flavoring. And so they did continue to experiment, but the basic tater tot was the best seller. And
I see.
so as they continued, it just grew and grew. They actually tried sort of in the early 60s, I think I'm going to say. They wanted to expand, so they didn't have to ship clear from Oregon and Idaho. They built a plant in Greenville, Michigan, where they were going to, grow potatoes and sell potato products. But here's the thing: the russet potato, which is the basis of, the potatoes grown in Idaho and Eastern Oregon, there's something in the soil. There's volcanic ash in the soil. They have those cool nights. They have just the right amount of humidity, growing season, etc. They couldn't grow the same potato in Michigan, that russet potato. It requires this sort of soil and climate that we have out here in Oregon and Idaho. So that did not do well. So they weren't without their setbacks.
Well, what business doesn't have, and any, based on what you have shared, they had several setbacks, but they kept going. And
Well,
what did
yeah.
they do in face of this setback?
Well, they came back and and bought more land and grew more potatoes. Literally, they bought vast acreage in at least in Eastern Oregon. The potato farms in Idaho were plentiful, as Leslie can attest. Lots of potatoes, but they still needed more potatoes. Transporting potatoes from far away in Idaho clear over to Ontario, there was a cost there, so they wanted to see if they could alleviate that cost. So they grew more potatoes in Eastern Oregon. So Eastern Oregon and Idaho, kind of the same growing conditions, and that's what they did. They built just hundreds of acres of potatoes. They called it Skyline Farms, and
Mhm.
many of the local we have irrigation out there. We have to pipe in the water from the Snake River and throw it on the ground and make those potatoes grow. So a lot of kids would earn their summer money by what we called moving pipe. They'd move those great big sprinkling pipe back then. Nowadays we have those great big wheels. We irrigate in circles, and but back then it was just manual labor, and because that was the technology of the day, and so they were just taking advantage of the technology of the day.
Absolutely. And Leslie, do you have any fond memories from back then?
Is my video audio working?
Not really.
So, listeners and audience, it seems we'll not be able to hear from Leslie.
Oh,
It's
shoot.
good to have you on the show anyway. So, tell us, Steve, as they were growing, did they also build a plant or a bigger plant in the Eastern Oregon?
The Ore-Ida plant is still there. The original plant is still there. They did build a plant in Burley, Idaho. So now they've moved. They built a plant where growing conditions and manufacturing was appropriate. So I think Les has ties to that Burley plant since he's from Idaho. So they built that second plant, and it was on the same Snake River that went through there. So they had The good thing about the Ontario plant is since it was already a produce plant, it was right on the railroad tracks. The railroad tracks ran right through the middle of that plant. And the Snake River was there. They had plenty of water. So the Burley plant went into production, but that was probably for French fries and other things. Tater tots to this day, and we've confirmed this recently since J.R. Simplot has taken over management of the tater tot for a season. Ore-Ida in Ontario, Oregon is the only place on the planet that produces Ore-Ida tater tots. Not Burley doesn't, just Ontario.
That is very, very interesting. So, as the company grew, how long did it stay in the family, and did it branch out, or is it still with the family?
It is not still with the family. In 1965, they sold the plant and all the trademarks and all the rights of tater tots and Ore-Ida to H.J. Heinz Company. And so if you think of the inception of the tater tot in 53 and selling the company in 65, that's only a 10-year span. I'll tell you, I think what happened is they had a tiger by the tail, and they didn't realize that it was going to grow so big, and they and I think this is an entrepreneurial fact. They sold while the price was high. The plant was doing well, everything was doing good. It was a good time to sell it. So I think that's a universal, not eternal, but universal principle.
Absolutely. And that's where every entrepreneur always sees that I'm starting a company. And if I'm growing a company, what's my exit plan? Because there are times when you are going to be continuing and persevering and putting in hour after hour, day after day, laboring at it. And yet it kind of comes back that along with that passion, you have family where you want to put in, and you do take that, and then it grew. And where would you say it is right now, and how would you describe their legacy?
I would say that the legacy kind of went dormant after that. After 65, after selling it to Heinz, the family knew all about the legacy. Close friends knew about the legacy, but the world in general, and this is where Les's sort of genius comes in. He saw that the legacy was slipping into I'll say a kind of a cycle with product development. I'll use the example of Kleenex, for example. When you want a tissue, you say, please hand me a Kleenex. Well, Kleenex is a product name. The Kimberly-Clark company invented Kleenex, but it became so widely used that Kleenex became the name for facial tissues. And what's happened with tater tots is that although people don't know the story, they just call everything tater tots. There are competitors who build the shape isn't trademarked, but the name is. So no one can call them tater tots, but people can make those shapes and sell them as Mexi fries, tater gems, this, that, and the other. But for whatever reason, being first is always best. So once they became tater tots, that name kind of stuck, and everybody knows that. So out of, we're talking what, Les, 70 years ago, this whole thing happened. In fact, tater tots turned 70 this year. So 1953 to 2023. It's time to let the world know that there is a story behind the tater tot, that it didn't just happen. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a production line malfunction. I read an article recently that said just that. It was a happy accident in a production. And I very lovingly contacted the publication and told them the actual story. And they were very happy to hear the actual story of how tater tots came to be. And so they didn't just happen. And, tater tots is an iconic food in America. I think it ranks in the top 20. But out of that top 20 iconic American foods, There's only 2 with brand names, Oreos and Tater Tots. Everything else is generic. Hamburger, macaroni and cheese. None of that's trademarkable, but Tater Tots is. And so I'd like to say that luck has something to do with it. Being in the right place at the right time. I think almost every successful brand has a little bit of that factor, taking advantage of the time.
So a lot of entrepreneurs dream about leaving their legacy, that let's say after they're gone, and I'm assuming that your folks, I'm not sure if they're still around or not, if they lived to see the reach that Tater Tots has expanded to and how many people it has impacted. If entrepreneurs were thinking about, I want to leave a legacy, and if you were to distill it down, what might be 2 or 3 lessons to pass on to our audience?
I would say start earlier than less than I did. I would say if you feel like you've got something that is going to be important, document it, journal it, make sure that you have very accurate records so that that legacy can be passed on. I'm more than a little. I'm sad that the Grigg name is not, does not own the word Tater Tots. That was sold back in '65. So all we can do at this point is try and link the past with the present. So make good records. Treat everybody with kindness. Don't walk all over people. You'll never get anywhere, I don't think. And you won't leave a good legacy. Not all legacies are good. If you want to leave a good legacy, treat your people well. And I think just be genuine. Always be genuine. That was my dad. Like I said, he was kind of a character. He was known for his witticisms. One thing he always said is never be embarrassed to make a profit. And that's an honest business principle. You just there's no harm in making a profit. Everybody has to make a living. I don't mind paying for goods and services. I'm not always trying to short circuit any products that I buy, where consumables that I purchase, because everybody needs to it deserves to make a profit. So be honest in your dealings with your company and your suppliers and vendors.
That's powerful. And I really like what you mentioned about being genuine and being respectful and kind to people, because people is what makes the company.
Exactly.
And as we talk about profit, so here's the thing, that if companies are making profit, then employees are benefiting too. The whole organization is thriving. So the key is that distributing that wealth and investing it back. When we talk about the distribution, is investing it back in the business. And this is what sounds like your parents and uncle did as well, because when they reinvested back in the business, then the business grew. And of course, you got to see whether what's in it for you and how does it work for you and your family. But looking at it, what a legacy and a great story. Thank you for joining us. And it was good to have you both.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us, because without you, the show would not be possible. And I hope, as an entrepreneur, or it doesn't matter where you are in your life, live your dreams and go. If you have a solution, go for it. Even if it's something new, don't be afraid to embark on that journey, because you never know. You could be the next Tater Tot that people may be talking about 7, 8 years from now, or even 10 years from now. So definitely go and explore. And thank you, Juan, for making the show possible. We'll
Thank you for having us.
Take care and be well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.